Howdy YouTube, and welcome to this episode of the Gunman. So this video here, I'm going to be taking you guys through the paintwork on this Honda Civic painted in sparkle grey pearl. The paint code is NH684P, and I'm going to be using Chromax Pro waterborne base coat system. While I'm getting the edge masking done, I've got my apprentice sorting out the prep work on one of the doors. So you can see out here, I've got my apprentice. He's from Sudan. His name is Bol. We call him Super Bol, and he's quite a good kid. He's keen to learn and pretty impressed with his work. So as you can see, I've got all the edge masking done. I've now got all the panels set up in the booth. I've thrown a piece of plastic over the car. But before I cut out the plastic for the rest of the car, I've decided to get my plastic primer on this bumper bar because we had a few cut throughs, and I'll be putting the wet on wet primer over all these bolt-on panels. Turns out that there is a little bit of wet on wet primer that I need on the body of the car, but it's probably better that I keep the rest of the car masked up first, so then I can just get that wet on wet exactly where I need it. So that bar was in pretty bad condition originally. I just got the apprentices to sand it out nice and fine. I even got him to use a bit of 800 wet sanding paper. Yep, the old school method, something I don't usually do very often. But just with bare plastic, it's got a tendency to go furry if you do your dry sanding. So I just sent him out the back with a hose and a bucket and sanded all that plastic back nice and smooth. And then I decided to plastic prime and wet on wet the bumper, and it came out fine in the end. I've obviously wiped all of these panels down with Prepsol or wax and grease remover before I did put any wet on wet primer down, and I'm using my ANI F150 full size gun. This has got a 1.3mm setup on it. The other painter that I'm working with has been bugging me for weeks and weeks to sell him my Iwata Ballari, which was previously my wet on wet / 2K direct gloss gun. So I decided, you know what, the F150 is going to have to step up and be my new wet on wet gun, and hey, it's actually quite fine. The gun does require a little bit more pressure than most guns I've ever really used. This thing only really sprays any good at 3 bar, or even a little bit above 3 bar, which is around 43 psi, so it's quite high pressure for a gravity feed gun. But it doesn't seem to go through any more paint than any of the other guns. It just seems to atomize a bit better at that higher pressure. Now, on the side of that gun, it does say HPS, so I would just be guessing, but I'd imagine that might be high pressure. I've recommended that gun to a lot of people, and most, if not all of them, have said, thanks Gunny, it's a great gun. The only thing is that being that it runs on such a high pressure, it may not be the best gun for DIY or home use, but I'd like to get some feedback on anyone that does have it and uses it with a smaller compressor and see how it holds up. So obviously continuing on with the masking, once that wet on wet primer is down and drying on all the panels, you may have noticed me using that Collab razor blade, something that I never used to like, and years ago an apprentice had a couple of them. I tried them once or twice and I thought, nope, I don't like them. I've got these Collab ones, and the only reason I actually started using them was because we'd run out of the standard blades. Someone forgot to order them. We wrote them down on the list, but they never came out. They may have been on back order or something like that. So I was forced to use that Collab blade. And after a week of using it and getting the hang of it, I realized, you know what, this is actually a lot quicker than using a standard razor blade. It's a bit safer, especially for apprentices who might cut through that plastic into the paint that you don't want to actually end up touching. So yeah, I highly recommend them. Give them a shot. You may hate them. I know lots of people do hate them, but you just got to figure out something that works for you, something that you're happy to do. So now I'm wiping the entire car down with some waterborne cleaner. Now prior to masking it, I did wipe it down with some wax and grease remover just to make sure that there was no solvent-based contaminants on there. Something that you don't really always have to do. Technically, by the book, the paint reps do recommend wiping it down with wax and grease remover first and then wiping it down with your waterborne cleaner. I've done both ways. I've actually found sometimes it can even work out better if you don't Prepsol it first. As long as you've kept it clean from the prep work stage and you don't have any oil-based contaminants on there, then you're right to just take it in, water-based clean it, and then paint straight over it. Again, that's something that you can just do trial and error, figure out what works for you and do what you will. So obviously now the masking's all finished off and I'm wiping it down with a tack cloth. This is a DuPont Sontara tack cloth, and they're quite good. They seem to last actually quite a while. A bit longer than the ones that we used to use, the Gerson tack cloth. I guess not using a tack cloth in between coats of base coat is obviously going to make them last a little bit longer. So back to my wet on wet gun. I actually turned that pressure down just a little bit so I didn't get that wet on wet primer flying all over the place. it's still going to get a nice enough atomization. I'm not smashing it on too heavy, but obviously wet enough to get a nice close coat over it. Sealing down all that primer, going to help over that prep work. There was one or two little cut throughs. Also, if there was one or two little sanding scratches or block marks that I missed when I was doing my prep work, it's just going to give me that little bit extra build, and especially when using the waterborne paints, it's a bit more important to make sure that the prep work is right, and especially all the bare metal spots covered up. So I'm using the other minigun here. This is the ANI R150, so the little brother of the ANI F150 that I was using there for primer, for the wet on wet primer, and that's literally just standard thinners in there. One of the paint reps told me that I could use fade out thinners to fade that edge in of the wet on wet primer. I did it, and I ended up having a few crinkling issues, so that fade out thinners actually stays wet for a bit longer than your standard thinners. So the fade out thinner, whilst it may look dry, it's actually still active, and that's just the nature of the product from what I've been told. So yeah, standard thinners over the edge of your wet on wet primers. If you need to fade that edge in, fine. Don't use fade out thinners. Anyway, continuing on with the job, I had a couple of bits of crap maybe flying out of the gun or off me or something like that. Got a feeling it would have came out of the gun. But yeah, that's just painting for you. So I just got a piece of 800 grit on one of those softback sanding sponges. Give that a bit of a scuff back, and yeah, that's all I needed. Need be, I could whack another coat of wet on wet over the entire door. It didn't turn out that it needs it. And up the top there was a few bits of silicone, so I just decided to give it a light scuff back, and then got rid of it 90%. There was a little bit of a low spot still there. If I was overly worried about it, or if it was a silver colour, I probably would have scuffed it back a little bit more and then just put a little bit more wet on wet primer on it also. But for a dark colour like this, you'll be able to smash a good coat of clear on it and fill it up. So you can yeah, be a little bit more relaxed on your prep work with the darker colours. It's not really recommended. You should still try to get your prep work correct on no matter what color it is, but if you do get a minor scratch or a minor imperfection in your base coat on a dark color, you can usually smash a good coat of clear on and fill it up. Over time it may actually sink back into it, but you'll usually be able to polish it out, give it a bit of a sand and polish. I've had a few people ask about this respirator that I've got here. So this is the SATA respirator and belt system that I've got, full air fed. It's been very good, definitely advantageous to my health. It got to the point where in this booth I felt like I was putting my health at risk, and I really had to get a new respirator. So it's got a very good belt on it. It's got an adjustable cheater valve on it too. And I've also recently got that Prevost air hose, which has got the swivel on it, you may have noticed just before. So it enables that air line to go straight down rather than wanting to kick out behind you, because I like to run these belts on my hip. If you put them to the front of your body or the back of your body, they just don't feel right. So I like to have them on my hip, but the way that they plug in east-west, I guess you could call it, rather than through the bottom like the DeVilbiss belt. The DeVilbiss belt plugs right down the bottom, and then the air line will naturally go down. But with the design of this SATA one, that swivel, I would say, is a must, really, if you wanted to run one of these SATA. I'm interested in anyone else who does run one of these SATA belts if you've had the same problem. But yeah, like say if I was painting this quarter panel here, the airline would be running the risk of touching the bumper bar or the door behind me, especially in this booth. It's probably not the biggest booth I've worked in, and 1 meter can make a real big difference in a spray booth. I think so anyway, especially when you're doing a job like this, which is a reasonable size. You know, I wouldn't really like to have to break a job like this up into 2 bake cycles. You got 2 gun cleans, and it's just wasted time, so I'd rather squeeze it all in. But in doing that, you really need to be skinny as possible, I guess. You don't want to be making the things that are on you any bigger than necessary. So yeah, ergonomic design is pretty important, and there's ways around it, like using those airline swivels. So I'll actually be doing a review on this SATA half mask air-fed respirator, and also another DeVilbiss one which I've got, so that'll be coming in the near future. I've had a few people express a little bit of interest on it, so yeah, I'll be putting some thought into that one and giving you guys as much info as possible on the 2 air-fed half masks that I've got. I do recommend wearing goggles or some sort of glasses, which is what you noticed me wearing before, because especially in a booth like this. It doesn't have the best draft. Like, once those filters down in the floor have been changed, you get like a week's worth of really good suction out of it. As soon as they start clogging up with paint, you've got to really adjust the settings on the booth, and it just slows it right down. So I noticed that the paint was hanging around a little bit longer and getting into my eyes and on my skin and all that. So always make sure I wear gloves and my spray suit. The only thing I don't do is wear a hat or like one of those hoods. They do come with these spray suits that I get. I love these Chromax spray suits. They're totally awesome. They're a two-piece suit. They got holes in the pocket, so I can grab my phone out and take a couple of happy snappies for the Instagrammers in between coats. They've got the carbon fiber woven anti-static lines down the spray suit, and yeah, they've got a really nice feel to them. So sometimes in the middle of summer, if I'm working in a booth with some real good suction, I'll just say, you know what, I'm not wearing those pants. It is literally way too hot. But I usually do try to wear the jacket when possible. My health when in the spray booth is something that even in the last 2 months I've been a little bit more switched on about. Look, at the end of the day, you guys do what you want. I think I really should be trying to set an example though. This channel has grown quite big in a short amount of time, and those who were with me from the start will remember I never even used to wear gloves. I used to hate them. I used to not like the feeling of them, but now I wear them all the time. If I'm ever handling paint, if I'm ever mixing a colour up, I'll be wearing gloves. And if I ever don't wear it, I hate it. I hate having paint all over my hands when I go home, under my fingernails and crap like that. I don't mind getting my hands dirty, but getting them dirty with a bit of prep dust or something like that, yeah, that's okay. I don't like having 2-pack paints and thinners and stuff all over my hands. Because at the end of the day, all these chemicals can be absorbed into your bloodstream and your body through your skin. So moving on to the clear coat stage now, obviously, and I'm using my Devilbus GTI Pro Light, the beautiful gold one. I've had this one for well and truly over 2 years now. Served me very well. 1.3mm TE20 air cap for the win. Running it at 2 bar, full fan, and about 4 winds out of the fluid. So that's fairly close to full fluid. I've recommended this gun and setup to lots and lots of people. I've actually only ever had one person say that they didn't like it. But then when I told him, I said, man, I've never heard anyone say that before. He said, maybe I need to just use it a little bit more. So he did come around and say he probably didn't give it enough of a try. So I had one guy recently actually say that he's tried spraying thinners through it, but it wasn't spraying properly. I did have to tell him that spraying thinners and spraying clear isn't exactly the same. There's obviously a lot more of a solid content in the clear coat. He was complaining that the center of the fan was non-existent. There's a couple of reasons that that's going to happen, because you're spraying thinners for starters, and if that's still happening when you're spraying clear, well then your pressure is too high. So I've got 2 bar, as I mentioned before, and that is the inlet pressure on that manometer that I have on the bottom of the gun, or the cheater valve. I like to run them on my guns just to get an idea of where I'm at with the pressures. I've actually got a different Pro Light, and that's got the DJI Pro Pod on it. That's been going quite well as well. For me, the Pro Light is just like the old faithful. It's the gun that I know exactly what I'm going to get out of it every time. It's bang for your buck, top build quality, capable of top quality finishes, and efficient. I find that if I use this gun, I know exactly how much paint I'm going to use on every single panel. I've got myself a bit of a formula down, so I'll look at a panel and I'll say 130 mils for a standard panel. I'll look at a bumper bar like this, I might go 220 because you've got a few openings in that you need to get into, so that's going to use up a little bit more. For a standard small size bumper bar, 200. Large bumper bar, 250. Inside and out of a door, 250 to 300 depending on the size. Big panels, maybe closer to 300. Medium sized panels like the ones that I'm doing here, you'd be around the 250, 260. As it turned out with this job here, it's quite a decent sized job. I had to mix up quite a lot of clear. I think it was 1.1 litre. I'm testing my memory now, I painted it last week. But I was left with 2 or 3 drops of clear. And when I'm using the top quality clear, that's the way I justify using it. I've seen people paint 1 or 2 panels and be left over with enough to paint the entire job again. I can't justify that if I'm using the top shelf, top dollar clear. Now this is a VOC clear, so it's actually the next stage up from high solids. It basically means that there is even a higher solid content in this than there is high solids clear. So low VOC is what it is. A few people do spin out at the application methods, whereas you just put one coat on and straight away you put your next coat on. Sometimes on bumper bars you can actually just put one nice wet coat and you'll have a similar film build than putting 2 coats of medium solids clear. It's better for the environment because you'll have less emissions and you're putting less product on the car as well. So there will be obviously a higher price tag with it, but you'll get a greater overall gloss and finish with the top quality clears. Not to say that you can't get some really nice finishes with the cheaper ones, because you can, but another advantage of these top shelf clears is the lastability, the durability, especially with the UV resistance. I live in Perth, Western Australia, and we have a lot of sun over here. In the middle of winter, we get days at 21 degrees with the sun shining and you're walking around in t-shirt and shorts. The weather in WA is actually a big reason that I'm still over here. I lived here for 4 years, then went back to Melbourne, decided, you know what, I don't like it there anymore. Perth is better for me. So anyway, I'm loving making these videos. I had a bit of fun making this one. This is just on my Saturday morning. Did a bit of editing for you guys. Hope you guys did enjoy watching it. Be sure to give it a thumbs up if you did. Jump over to my website, thegunman.net.au. There's a few repair articles and paint articles over there as well. I haven't been spending so much time on it lately, but there's still some good content on there. Now you've seen this video, get out there and paint some shit. Thanks for watching, and this has been another Gunman production. Goodbye.